Welcome to CRT. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen. Well, King Solomon is said to have written the popular and tried and true verse Ecclesiastes 1:9. There's nothing new under the sun. But something feels very different about America's national security today. And one lieutenant general believes he's never seen a more chaotic security environment. And he served under 7 presidents. He is retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. Dick, welcome.
Bambi, great to be with you and great meeting you back in South Florida, Mar-a-Lago, just a couple of weeks or so ago. And I'm glad stayed connected.
Yeah, that's the last time I saw you when we invited you
Hmm.
to be a speaker. So thank you for speaking for us on stage, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. So for those who don't watch you on News Nation, where you're probably on every single day, tell my audience, give my audience a little bit of background, uh, what you're doing these days, not only at
Hmm.
Nation, but also your family, because you have a very big family and you live sounds like a pretty nice life.
Just blessed, going through Thanksgiving. You and I were just talking about it. We were counting our blessings now that we head into the Christmas season. It kind of gives you a chance to kind of look back. You mentioned 7 administrations. If you add that up, I think I was born in the Air Force family. My dad went to West Point, and I ended up going to the Air Force Academy. And as Dad got promoted, moved up through the ranks, I went to 13 schools in 12 years. Finally, was recruited to play ball and attended the Air Force Academy and was there for 4 years and off and running. Went to pilot training and several tours of duty, both flying aircraft, principally bomber aircraft. I was the first stealth B-2 squadron commander. I was a B-1B operations group commander and a B-52 wing commander, and flew a number of trainer aircraft. Specifically, I was an instructor pilot on the T-38. Even on a exchange program with the Russians, I got to fly 2 Russian aircraft. So it's an interesting and maybe somewhat a little bit of a unique Air Force career, but turned out to be a military career because I served a lot in the military. In the joint world, I was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 2 tours of duty. I was at U.S. Strategic Command as the director of plans and policies, and then went and our 2 daughters also married young men who served their nation in a variety of capacities. Our youngest, Addie, is married to an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, Robert, and he's in Air Force Special Operations and under 7 combat tours of duty. He's in terms of deployments, and so we continue to serve as Dad served, and I was blessed to serve, and now Robbie and others, and my son-in-law Matt had emanated out of the intelligence community. So the point is that I guess it's in our blood. Transitioned out of the military in 2012. Ended up going into the private sector, kind of the road less traveled for retired senior general officers. I didn't go into defense industry per se. I spent a couple years as executive vice president of the Air Force Association, about 120,000, 100 to 120,000 member organization. I went up to New York City for a couple years and found my way back down here to South Florida. Um, my first wife, Jody, we've been married for over 4 decades, and she passed away from a tough fight with cancer several years or so ago. And now, however, the Lord's blessed me with Gigi. We both have combined our households, and she has a spirit of service, obviously, as a strong woman of faith, but also her son TR, twice combat tours as the 82nd Airborne in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so there's lots of service in the Newton household. But between her and I, we've got 6 adult kids with 6 wonderful spouses, and between us, we've got 15 grandkids. So think of the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, and focus on the family all thrown into one kit and caboodle. So, like I said, just counting our blessings and very, very busy. The last point is spent a lot of time in DC to a degree, New York for business. I've participated in a couple of congressional studies, on air a lot. I was with Fox News for about 8 years. Now I'm with News Nation. In fact, was on twice today, talking about the latest peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia that President Trump's mediating, as well as most recently the counter drug boat combat action we've seen in the Caribbean, as well as perhaps anticipated attack on Maduro, who is the president of Venezuela, should he decide not to go into exile. So that thrown in there in about 3 minutes and 33 seconds is enough on me. But that's it to lead your your opening salvo in all those years, Bambi, and serving and being blessed to serve this great nation and serve our God first and foremost, but this nation and having a wonderful family and bride around me is I've never seen a more chaotic national security or global security environment in all of my life. I'm going on 70 years old. Final point in terms of the geopolitical aspect, I was in Gaza just a couple of weeks or so ago. We can get into that as well, but it's just it's a crazy, hectic world out there that I think I would have our listeners, really pay close attention to and stay engaged.
I think we're going to dive. First of all, welcome for your service and welcome. You
Thank
said
you.
a busy person last night we spoke that you were doing Granddad's Day. So if you're not doing TV, you're with your grandchildren, all 15, 19, I forget what's
15,
15.
15, but who's counting?
Thank you for spending this hour with me, maybe 90 minutes. So we're going to take a dive into some of those situations that our country is in. Um, but as far as the chaotic security environment, which you said
Mhm.
that we are in, if you could just give sort of a broad brush, without talking the details, what is the overarching, why are we here?
Well, I think for a couple reasons. Number one, we could go back well into history, but let's just go back to really 9/11. The morning of 9/11, I was the commander of Minot Air Force Base in a large B-52 wing of bombers. We were going through a nuclear weapons exercise, a global exercise. And literally on the morning of 9/11, we are about ready to finish off that exercise. Then 3.5 weeks later, our B-52s and other bombers and U.S. military capabilities are actually going after conventional targets in Afghanistan, principally going after Taliban and trying for the hunt for bin Laden and Al Qaeda, because that's when America struck back. So you look at the morning of 9/11, you go fast forward to when the first salvo of those weapons went back against what really was the kickoff of the global war of terror on the 6th and 7th of October of 2001. Fast forward to today, we have a generation of men and women in uniform, all 2.1 million of them, active, guard, reserve, awesome. They will run and have demonstrated they will run to the sound of guns. They will bleed blue, bleed red for this country. And so will their loved ones surrounding them. But this generation of men and women in uniform, as I mentioned, our son-in-law Robbie knows nothing but a post 9/11 environment. So that brings with it certain challenges in the geopolitical world. If I had a lineup of threats that we face right now as a nation, uh, it, it, it's hard to think in terms of which one's more important at any one time. But the number one adversary, in my view, is China, both from a military standpoint, diplomatic standpoint, certainly an economic standpoint. Then there's Russia, who just by the way conducted the largest land attack since World War II back in February of 2022. We're going to be going on 4 years, Bambi, of since Putin decided to attack Ukraine the second time. The first time he attacked was he took Crimea in 2014, and we didn't do anything about it, literally. Fast forward to now, you've got millions of young men on both sides combined who have either been killed in action or wounded. And you've got innumerable families, especially Ukrainians, who are being constantly bombarded by Putin, war criminal acts. So you got China, Russia. Oh, by the way, Putin sits on top and commands the largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world.
Mm.
And so that's concerning. And then you've got North Korea, who is again, that's hard to determine where they're going to be putting their efforts, other than they're trying to modernize their military, both in below the sea in terms of intercontinental ballistic missiles and pursuing a nuclear weapons arsenal themselves. So Kim Jong Un cannot be trusted. Most recently, back in June, specifically on June 22nd, when President Truman authorized the use of lethal force with B 2 bombers and Tomahawk cruise missiles and other capabilities to take out the Iranian nuclear weapons development capability. And we did effectively. We did so very effectively. But Iran is still the largest exporter, or had been up to that point, of terrorism. You think about Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, faced by Israel. You got Hamas in Gaza. You got the Houthis down in Yemen. Certainly, you've got uh, terrorist groups in Iraq and Syria who are beholden to Iran. So that's a very much a concern. So I throw that. That's a lot to throw at you in one fell swoop. But that's my premise for what I think is we still are in a very, very chaotic world right now.
No, that was very well done. I mean, great summary. But it's interesting you started off with the 9/11, and I was thinking that, wow, I guess the 21st century is the start of the global war on terror. I would have thought
Hmm.
you said Islam might have been sort of the number one threat, but China was is the number one threat for you, and then Russia. But let's talk about let's go into some of those threats. But let's start with one that maybe is not on the top five, but it is certainly something that's being discussed. I want to talk about these recent developments, particularly the one with Secretary of War Pete Hegseth being accused of war crimes for striking those alleged narco-terrorist boats from Venezuela, particularly the order to strike twice. They call it double tap.
Hmm.
I've read that these double tap orders have been given multiple times under multiple presidents. So I'm just curious, is this controversy just going to go away? I mean, where it seems big now, but where do you see this going?
Well, President Trump and the administration released their national security strategy for the United States last Thursday, just a couple days or so ago, and it puts a preeminence still on China. It perhaps takes a little bit walking back in terms of a focus on Europe at this point, believe it or not. And we can talk a little bit about that. I still think we ought to remain strong with President Zelensky in Ukraine as we try to help them, to try to push back Russia and compel Russia not to continue to attack. And therefore, I think Putin would very much has his sights on other nations in Europe, but that's another conversation. But also puts a preeminence on the Western Hemisphere and the Caribbean, and in this case, counter drug operations. And I think it's something we've been in a war on drugs, Bambi, since the Nixon administration in the early 70s. That's when President Nixon, wisely so, by the way, but he established the Drug Enforcement Agency. Well, fast forward to 2025, we're still wringing our hands over drugs. Drugs are still killing Americans. If it's the largest killer of Americans through drugs, is really through fentanyl. But you look at Colombia, which is another producer of drugs that kill people. They will have their the largest crop of cocaine and the export of or cocoa and export of cocaine in decades is happening this year. Not only is that a threat to the United States, but it's also a threat to Europeans as well. So what President Trump has done, I salute this, frankly, is finally really raising the game in the United States to go after these drug cartels, these narco terrorists, even these leaders. President Maduro of Venezuela is not only the president of Venezuela, but he also sits atop the cartel of the Suns, which is another, mainly a trafficker of drugs that, come into American neighborhoods and our schools and our communities. So it's about time that we've started to do something about this instead of just making a focus on law enforcement, who've done a valiant job trying to, prevent drugs from hitting the streets of America, but now using military forces and capabilities. Secretary Rubio, several weeks or so ago, designated, and the administration essentially designated these drug cartels as now foreign terrorist organizations. I think that's the right way to look at it in a post 9/11 environment in 2025. If not, 25 years from now, you and I are going to have another podcast, and we're still going to be talking about the war on drugs and what we have or have not been able to do in terms of these drugs that are killing Americans. I believe it's a pervasive threat to the American people. The president of the United States, every president, you mentioned 7 administrations I've served in, have the responsibility as a commander in chief to protect the American people. That is job one. What President Trump's doing and what he's going after in terms of these counter drug operations is doing just that. Let me segue here real quick. When you think of drugs and you think of the war on drugs that we're currently undergoing right now, there's three main pursuits of that. One is again it's the desire of people, or for whatever reason, have bringing drugs into their lives, and so That's something we in the American people have to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror, and that is something that unfortunately we've lived with. Certainly in my life, drugs have been preeminent in some circles within our American society and so forth. So but the second point is the that's one leg of the stool, but the other leg of the stool is the drug supply. Where does the drug supply come from? Well, fentanyl, largest killer of American people from a illegal drug standpoint, really comes from Mexico. And within Mexico, there's about three of those major drug cartels. But who supplies the precursor chemicals for these drug cartels, these Mexican drug cartels, to produce fentanyl? China. And so they're part of the supply chain as well, along with the supplier being Colombia building the cocoa and or creating the cocoa, then creating the drug cocaine and so forth. The third leg of that stool, though, is the transshipment of it or the trafficking of it. And this is where you have despot leaders like Maduro and others uh, who really provide the drug trafficking resources to get the drugs moved from point A to point B, especially in the Caribbean. Not only, perhaps in the broader Caribbean area or Latin America, but also that's how they hit the streets in the United States. And so, what President Trump has done through his Secretary of War and Secretary Hegseth is now authorized, and I believe there are legal orders going after these drug traffickers, narco traffickers who are killing Americans. That's really, to me, from a plain and simple standpoint. And so, how many more generations do we have to wait where we can try to not only deter but defeat these drug cartels on the waters of the Caribbean and prevent those drugs from getting in the United States, principally through the maritime aspect of this? So, again, that we could have a 12-hour discussion on this, but by and large, I believe that the president is justified through his Secretary of War to now use military force to go after drug traffickers, narco traffickers, who are harming Americans, and to protect the lives not only of Americans today but future generations, to deter them from and compel them not to be trafficking drugs, that hit the American street.
Given all that justification and the fact that the video that is shown of the strikes, that both Democrats and Republicans have different views of what
Mhm.
transpired, does this just go away then in terms of these accusations?
No, I don't think it goes away. And by the way, Admiral Mitch Bradley, who's the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, but on 2 September, which was the first counter narco drug boat strike that the nation executed back on the 2nd of September, he was the operational commander in charge as a 3-star, as the commander of Joint Special Operations Command. That's why he went up to Capitol Hill last week, along with our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, to disclose to key members of both the Senate and the House what actually transpired on that day, and underscored a couple points. Number one, that they were lawful orders, they were legal orders, they were orders authorized by the Secretary of Defense. Uh, I was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff as a brigadier general at the time, but I oversaw global operations, and so you have to have orders if you're going to use lethal force and put men and women in harm's way. They have to be signed off by the Secretary of Defense, and he's what they call the Target Engagement Authority. And he gave that authority to then Vice Admiral Bradley, now Admiral Bradley, to conduct that operation. It was also reviewed by, and counsel was advising both the Secretary of Defense and then during the operation itself, uh, legal counsel, judge advocate generals, which I've had by my side as well when they've had certain operations. And so that is point one. I believe the second point is that uh, I don't have access to the classified data or the intelligence. I don't have to the operation, but my judgment tells me and my experience tells me is the fact that then Vice Admiral Bradley used his authorities that he had from the Secretary of Defense, his legal authorities with legal review, to conduct the operation in a manner that is part of the American way of war, and that we've been doing so since the global war on terror. Now, fast forward to this war on drugs. Now that the military is employing. Uh, the third point is I would again have our listeners really understand and perhaps try to contemplate that we need to make sure that our military leaders are given the latitude. In this case, Admiral Brady's one of our most uh, effective, most experienced, most capable combat leader we have. We've got to give him and future leaders the latitude to be able to go out and once they receive their orders and are authorized to use lethal force, there's some trust there, but there's also we've got to trust their judgment. And in this circumstance, I believe he probably made a very tough call after the first attack was done on that drug boat and to come back for a second attack on that very same drug boat. That all said, uh, I do believe in this circumstance that I think it's appropriate that we continue to engage with members of Congress. I believe that we should perhaps, if there's enough question, and in my view there could be, that we do an investigation, either through the Department of War Inspector General when they're fully suited to be able to do this, or perhaps up on Capitol Hill, mainly through the Senate Armed Services Committee, I suppose. I'm very concerned, however, over the last several days after that first video came out, and then Admiral Bradley was up there and is, speaking with members of Congress, that it's beginning to politicize, and you kind of lose really what we're doing here. You got people on the left think that we shouldn't be doing it in the first place, and they'll do anything they can against the current administration. Then you got people on the right that are saying, I don't mean blindly supporting this, but uh, I think it ought to stand the test of there's enough question in my mind, perhaps enough question in the American people's mind that, okay, if we do an investigation, let's do it. Let's move forward with it. Let's apply all our abilities to do that, to conduct the investigation. Let's be transparent. And the best place to be transparent to the American people, I believe, is to Congress. And then if someone or a group of people need to be held accountable for whatever reason, you hold them accountable, but you do it through an unbiased, bipartisan investigation. It's my view.
I mean, listening to you, it sounds like it's really become political in the military
It
almost.
has. Yeah.
That, and so I want to ask you about what the so-called seditious six, the six lawmakers who made that viral video calling for 1.3 million servicemen to not follow unlawful orders. Of course, they're saying that they never said don't follow, e- lawful orders. They said don't follow unlawful orders. But it does seem like they were inciting insubordination. And I want to know, is there an analog in, to this in the military that you've seen in the past where there was an incitement of insubordination similar to this and something happened or something they were held accountable?
Well, maybe, and this is a stretch. It could have been the My Lai incident back in 1968, where there was a captain who was on the ground and savagely went after and killed innocent Vietnamese citizens. But it's very rare in my point one. Point two, uh, when I was a senior at the Air Force Academy before I graduated, every Air Force Academy cadet up to that point, I believe, and still today, we took a legal course called Law for Commanders. And part of my duty as an Air Force officer or as a military officer, and then when I was especially in command, but all the way up to when I was a senior officer, even as the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, I would take refresher courses on the law of armed conflict. So it's something that is really it's part of our almost not everyday experience at times, especially if you're in combat. You have wise, sage, experienced legal counsel to make sure exactly what we do because the moral fiber of our men and women in uniform, those volunteers who run to the sound of guns, those 2.1 million men and women serving in our military, they're part of the best moral fiber of the United States of America. We are the best led, I believe, the best trained. We're not yet the best equipped because we've really let our military atrophy over the last 10 or 12 years. But we're going to get back to that, I believe, in terms of a highly effective from an equipment standpoint. But
How
I've got every bit of confidence in our leaders. I've got every bit of confidence in our American, men and women serving. It's an affront to them, is my point. That and everyone I've known has ascribed to the highest moral fiber and character serving in the military. And for that, for six politicians who formerly served in the uniform, they're veterans, but for them to have to go out of their way to try to, bring about some disdain towards whatever the current administration is and whether or not a military operation is legal or not illegal, I thought it was really just uncalled for and not helpful at all.
how can they be held accountable for at
I
least creating chaos?
I think they can be held accountable in the voting booth. frankly, and that's where it should be. I don't want us to get into a position where we've got, by the way, they can voice their opinion. If Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, who I don't agree with very often, he can voice his opinion, and that's his right, and that's his duty really, as he sees himself as a politician, I suppose, from the great state of Arizona. But I think ultimately where we hold them accountable is in the voting booth.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it's hard to know what is free speech and inciting insubordination, or it's a really
It's a great point in your question, but at this, what I would do is, we've got so many things we need to focus on. We've got to modernize our military. We've got to, we're involved with, a major effort to get Ukraine and Russia to agree on a peace settlement, and in the eastern part of Ukraine and so forth. We've got still a hotbed of Islamic terrorism still, that our last several months of the Gaza occupation, now what Israel has led the effort to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah and Houthis and so forth. But really, you need the United States to stand tall with our key allies, specifically Israel and the Middle East. You've got these counter drug operations in the Western Hemisphere and so forth, and you've got a rising China modernizing their military faster than any nation in the world. So my point is, you only have so many hours in a day, or so many minutes, or so many.
it's
Yeah, I think this is something we ought to just, I'm looking for more ways to unify the country versus trying to disunify at this point.
great point. Great point. We talked a lot about current events, our current threats. I want to go back a little bit, and Secretary Hegseth called the Pentagon the woke department, and so we should define woke. My definition of woke is seeing the world through an oppressor and oppressed lens,
Mm.
maybe
Hmm.
equality as the greatest virtue, maybe even ordained by Christ himself. That's to me the definition of woke. I think you agree with me in terms of the military becoming woke. So I want to ask when did it start becoming that way? What were some of the signs?
Well, again, growing up as an Air Force kid, living on Air Force bases and moving around, and dad having some joint tours of duty and so forth. First and foremost, I from mom and dad, and now Gigi and I, how we look at life and so forth, and everything else in between. If you mention those six kids and six spouses and 15 grandkids, how we try to pattern our life is a sense of priority. To me, the sense of priority, and to both her and I, frankly, is God first, family, and nation. And that's really what I've known all of my life, frankly. Um, and I believe that during certain eras of time, I recall as a kid in Vietnam, those who were against the war also were against the American soldier, the American fighting man and woman. That was unfair. A lot of that was politically induced. But then that's kind of on the left. But then there's also things on the right that, when you get politics involved, regardless if it's a left hand view or right hand view, and you start really now tinkering with the United States military, because our job, Bambi, is to fight and win our nation's wars, period, dot. So if you try to do things that really, trying to put either values that don't match what those challenges are, enough of trying to be organized, trained, equipped to fight and win our nation's war, but really you try to go after cultural things, you try to go after societal things through the military. I think it's just the wrong part of this nation, this fabric of this nation, to really do that. And I speak that both, again, from a left aspect of this, as well as from a political right aspect of it. So I'm very concerned that you know, there were a lot of things that I saw early on, say, coming out of the Bush administration, Bush 43, into the Obama administration. Um, and we were somewhat pressured that you couldn't really underscore your faith publicly. Um, Again, I understand, quote, the separation of church and state and secular versus faith-based and so forth, and what that a role can be versus a constitution and so forth. I mean, we're not about having, we ran away from the Church of England, first trying to adapt that. So, but that aside, but what I saw though was as I was transitioning, leaving the military into the private sector, there are certain things you just couldn't do. I mean, you were pressured not to necessarily use your Savior Jesus Christ. Like when I pray, because of my faith raising, growing up in the church, and now having the patriarchal setting as a grandfather now and a father. Um, I in my name, in Jesus' name we pray, Amen. That was really frowned upon to actually use in Jesus' name we pray. It's a subtle thing, but it's
Yeah.
those subtle things that kind of get inside, and that so what is a small W woke thing becomes a large W woke thing, and now we get to a point where you've got uh, very left leaning type political leaders are trying to instill their values on our American men and women in uniform. I just think it's a wrong place, wrong time to do that. The other aspect, though, is you got to be careful that pendulum swings the opposite, in the right direction. Now all of a sudden, we're going to be going after woke generals and woke. I don't know a woke general, by the way, because it's always been very private how you keep your political views just to yourself when you're serving in uniform. But at the same time, if you've got your own beliefs in terms of, as I mentioned, God, family, nation, you should be able to be free to speak about that in the appropriate setting and so forth, but not placing your morals on other people. That's not the threat. But anyway, I think we just got to be careful we don't have this pendulum swinging where we now have we're gonna promote her because she is a conservative admiral, or versus we're not going to promote him because he's a liberal general. I never ever want to get in that position where we're thinking through the lens of the domestic politics of this. Knowing, however, I'll close on this point. Knowing, however, that we live in a very political world and a very domestic, politics are challenged, and that's because welcome to 2025 in the information age. You deal with that every day, but there's my point is there is a not a happy medium, but a right medium when it comes to that.
Mhm.
And if Dick Newton's beliefs as a senior leader, that he has values, American values, by the way, if he carries the fabric of what our men and women have, fought and died for, and supports that and supports the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, then if I should also be able to say, or at least make commentary, or at least have my own beliefs in casual conversations of my priorities in my life. As I mentioned, God, family, and nation. So, but you just got to be careful here. You don't want to get to the point where you're splitting hairs all the time and worried about what someone says or doesn't say. But at the same time, you don't want to prevent people from being able to be people. I mean, this is a human endeavor. This is a
Yeah.
God-given human endeavor.
I think part of not being able to say in Jesus' name also has to do, especially the timing. I think it could be also around the early aughts when the new atheist movement sort of emerged. I know in Silicon Valley that was quite popular between 2000 and 2010, 2015. So I think that it was also
Yeah,
something that you were
interesting point.
in there too. So under Obama around 2015, there were changes to standards for women. It wasn't outright said that standards were lower, just that women's tests were measured on, quote, gender adaptive scoring scales. And then in 2016, also under Obama, trans were allowed to join the military. At the time, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter said 0.19%. So that's less than a quarter of a percent of the
Mhm.
1.3 million active duty members were trans. They could serve openly. They could also receive medical procedures to transition. How did the military change in terms of its readiness after this time and these changes?
Well, I woke up one day, it was 2011, into work, and our Secretary of the Air Force, Mike Donnelly, gave me a call and says, "Hey, Dick, um, President Obama, maybe it wasn't 2000, maybe it's more closer to 2009 or 10. But anyway, if you recall, under President Bill Clinton in the early 90s, established the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it allowed men and women who were gay to be able to serve, but not necessarily, have to, be communicative with that or place their lifestyle or have their lifestyle placed in certain areas or even be affected by, hate of people of that gay lifestyle. So it really it was again a Clinton thing where you're splitting hairs, but I think in this case it actually worked pretty well, believe it or not. Um, I get it. And then fast forward to Obama under his during his election leading up to 2008, he said, "I want gays to be able to serve openly in the U.S. military." And so 2009, maybe halfway through 2009 or 2010, I was uh, given the opportunity to help President Obama shape how we should move forward and do away with "Don't Ask, Don't Tell." And we ended up doing that. It was my job, as we had a couple of the three-star generals on there, was to advise the president. And the point was, is it wasn't necessarily to change the lifestyles of what has traditionally been in the military. It wasn't to force gay lifestyles on other people, but it was definitely part of what I would call an agenda on especially from him having gone through the democratic process to be elected. Fast forward to when you just mentioned 2015, 16, that old slippery slope, Bambi, and then all of a sudden you've got this whole idea of transgender and serving openly. And again, go back to the point we talked about earlier. What's the purpose and the mission of the United States military? It's to fight and win our nation's wars. It's not to be bogged down by these societal you know in corners of the society. You mentioned what 0.19% or whatever the number was. A very small percentage of Americans who thought they wanted to serve this nation, but felt that the nation was obligated to provide them every opportunity as trans and to help for the successful transition and veterans and all that kind of stuff. No, we're getting farther and farther away. If we get Here's an airman standpoint. The farther and farther we get away from the American flight line of B-52 bombers or B-2 stealth bombers or F-22 fighters, the farther we get away from that flight line and we focus on things that aren't necessarily focused on fighting to win our nation's wars, that really is going to be bad for the U.S. military. And it cuts away not only at our readiness, you mentioned the term readiness, but our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest this nation has to offer. you know and so not to get into our moral conversation here, but the point is that we lost our way, I think, during that time period. And it goes back to what I think the Trump administration is trying to do, and certainly Secretary Hegseth is trying to do, is to if not reinstall, but underscore this warrior ethos, which is so vital and important. Just like in my dad's day, when he went to war in Korea, when he went to war in Vietnam, his job was, he felt, was to help this nation fight and win our nation's wars and so forth. Our Robbie, who's Air Force Special Operations officer, through those 7 combat deployments. He believes, and I certainly know he believes this, and it's right. His job is to fight and win our nation's wars. All this other stuff that we try to bring into the military culture is wasteful. It takes our eyes off the ball. Frankly, I think it's not useful at all in preparing this, our men and women to fight, as well as making sure that we've got the best military in the world. Because we go back to that first thing we talked about, Bambi, what this area is, in my view, the most chaotic global security environment in the world. It demands the fact that we focus on organized, train, equip the right way.
Do you think the pullout from Afghanistan was a direct result of this sort of cultural change and lack of readiness in the military?
I think the pullout, what I've referred to on air specifically, if you look into the end of August of 2021, was a debacle of leadership under the Biden administration. Specifically, I think President Biden as the commander in chief. Notice I didn't. I'm not saying that as from a political standpoint or how I believed or didn't believe in terms of what he purported during his administration, but I think that's a failure of leadership. And the decision early on in July to close Bagram Air Base just to the north of Kabul, other aspects of making such a hasty withdrawal with no basis for a requirement to do so, other than perhaps to get to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, perhaps in September later, a couple weeks later. And then on August 26th, as I recall, you have 13 Americans killed at the Abbey Gate. Um, and because I believe that the pullout of Afghanistan and the failure of leadership there in that regard, in the broadest of sense, you put all that together, and that's where I think that it was a bad decision, bad timing, bad for this nation, frankly. And we can talk later on about, but that's where you have, if the United States is going to pick up and leave Afghanistan as the way we did it, what does that tell Putin in terms of whether or not the United States is going to stand strong? Are we still going to be able to deter Putin? Well, it's not a direct corollary, but it's close.
Mhm.
In February of 2022, he that has, as I mentioned, the largest invasion since World War II because he's got his eyes on Ukraine, and he takes part of Ukraine and so forth. And so, um, what does this do to the Islamic terrorist leaders in Iran in terms of you know whether or not they're going to continue to support Hezbollah going after the Lebanese as well as Israeli positions in northern Israel, or Hamas on October 7th, on and on and on. Point is, American leadership and American decisions has impact not only on U.S. national security, but really the rest of the world as well, and certainly our allies. And so that's, I think, we went from a very small situation, relatively speaking, in Afghanistan. I don't mean a small situation because, as I mentioned, those 13 Americans were killed, which is still is gut wrenching to me and millions of others Americans. But my point is, if you look at a small place in terms of a piece of land in Afghanistan, has broad ramifications on U.S. global security as well as the world. That's something to really contemplate here.
I want to ask you about what I call a through line moment. It's something that I've asked several people, and maybe because you are in the military, you've been in the military, this is something you've thought about quite a bit. I mean, you're part of government. But a through line moment for me is when you start realizing that there is are you still there? Uh-oh.
I got to
I think,
change out my battery. I'll be right there.
oh, okay. I have to put on like that waiting music. Dun 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 no 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 no. Hmm, 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 hmm.
Sorry, Bammy, you
That-
got to take this. My bad. There
That's
we go.
that's the Jeopardy music.
It worked.
Dun,
How's
dun,
that?
dun. You sound,
Okay,
I just can't see you.
I'm coming. I'm coming back.
I'm gonna how has
Here we go.
oh boy, you're upside down again. Okay. So let's talk about, you and I talked about a little bit about this. This is Secretary Hegseth's calling of the 800 generals. The generals, he brought them to the US. And For me, I actually liked that gathering. I thought it was instrumental in getting the Gaza Peace Summit together,
Sure. Yeah.
um, because that historic agreement and event involved many countries, some of whom are regional rivals. And this showing of American strength by Hegseth was, I think, instrumental to happen right before that summit, because it showed to America as well as our rivals and allies that we were back in the most lethal way. I
Hmm.
think I'm the only one that
Hmm.
actually has that view, but it did show a show extreme sense of strength, and I think that was this position of strength drove fear in the our rivals and allies, and it drove them to unite at this summit. I'm wondering if that's even was coordinated, but I really liked it. You didn't like that gathering.
Yeah.
Why didn't you like it? And
Well, Bambi, actually, you have a pretty good point. I'm gonna take your point and we can dive into this a little bit. But the idea of the Secretary of War bringing together 800 general officers, by the way, also uh, the senior enlisted advisors of those senior general officers also. It was a fairly significant show of force if you look at it from an external standpoint. So I'll take your point on that. Actually, I haven't given that a whole lot of thought, but that's an interesting perspective. Now, however, um, the fact that Secretary Hegseth felt compelled to reintroduce the warrior ethos to these gatherings of senior general officers and senior enlisted leaders across our military. Um, I would remind Secretary Hegseth, and he knows this because he had served a tour of duty in Iraq when he was part of the Minnesota National Guard and so forth. But this is the most highly experienced combat effective uh, group of military leaders, I think, in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime. And so this crop of U.S. military leaders that were gathered there at Quantico in Virginia several months or so ago, they know nothing but the global war on terror and combat since 9/11. This is a 9/11 senior general officer and flag officer leadership ranks, as well as their enlisted leader ranks as well. So I thought him thinking perhaps that he needs to reintroduce the warrior ethos spirit into this gathering of highly capable men and women serving in the senior ranks of the U.S. military. I just thought it wasn't necessary. And I thought it was more of a kind of a show of force of him being, I'm now Secretary of War, new sheriff in town. This is how we're going to have to operate. Where if you look at that gathering, um, as I mentioned, their experience base was is renowned, and I've got the utmost confidence, not only in their leadership, not only in the quality of their service, but frankly in the moral fiber that they represent in uniform. Whether or not, so that was point one. Secondly, um, it just seemed to me, I don't want to say a waste of time, but if that was the premise of why he felt compelled to get them in a room and tell them that we're going to be have more warrior ethos, there's lots of warrior ethos that was staring back at him, while he was on the stage with his, commentary and so forth.
Yeah,
Um,
like interesting that now that I sort of raised that, it wasn't for them, it wasn't to remind them about the warrior ethos. I think they all know about that warrior ethos. I think it was a show of force to everybody else watching
yeah,
that.
I, I don't think that was his intent though. I'm going to give you A for effort on that one, but
Oh,
it's an interesting perspective. It's a
I'm not
very
trying to
interesting.
defend him.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the timing of it all because of
yeah,
what's after that was
very interesting. Okay.
for this historic event. And I thought, wow, how do you get those countries together? Was it 20 countries? I mean, I don't know how many, but you had a lot of those leaders really sort of saying, okay, we get it. And also it wasn't just the warrior ethos. Wasn't he trying to underscore the spiritual readiness that the that our troops and the military had to have, something that you said probably was lost, even when you were pressured to not say in Jesus' name.
Yeah, I think it was probably less on the spiritual readiness aspect of it, although that was a point that he made. I think what he was describing or trying to make sure they understood is that you don't have to be equipped with all this aspects of what he refers to as wokeism and things like that. You're free to lead and lead well. And I'm going to provide every opportunity, but it just didn't hit the right note with me. I wasn't in the room. But it's almost as if I'm a senior general officer leader in that case. If I was still on active duty, I really was going to say, why is he talking to us about this? This. It just didn't seem to really raise the bar in terms of what he was really trying to, or at least trying to understand what he was trying to do here. But it did give him an opportunity to kind of say, okay, let your faith take you where you need to go. And I have faith in you, presumably, but you don't have to necessarily be handcuffed in terms of what your personal faith is. And I don't think he's just necessarily speaking to just evangelical Christians in the room. He was talking to everybody about what their faith journey may or may not have taken them at that point. So I think, and then he turned it over to the president. President Trump was, for an hour. I did watch that for about an hour and 10 minutes, and it kind of gave me more of a smack of a political rally than it did really when you put all your warrior leaders together. Which again, I'm less compelled to want to have domestic political conversation inside a room full of military men and women. That's something that really should be outside of our service in terms
Would
of
it have
political.
been a recruiting opportunity, though? The recruitment is up. I guess the
Hmm.
Army
Hmm.
show that in 2026 recruiting goals, they achieved their recruiting goals 4 months earlier. So did the National Guard, or
Oh
they,
yeah, yeah. Uh,
so they're doing a good job recruiting. So something is,
oh,
yeah.
oh, do an exceptional job because I oversaw Air Force recruiting. I testified in the House and the Senate, and the challenges we were this whole idea of trying. That's where I think, in my personal view, is if you try to tinker with the American military, both on the left side and the right side and so forth. If you try to tinker with it, that does hurt recruiting. It also hurts retention. But in this case, and certainly under this administration, recruiting is up. It's awesome, and it goes back to that debacle withdrawal in August from Afghanistan in 2021, and what happened at the Abbey Gate with those 13 valiant Americans killed unnecessarily, in my view. That you're right. There are political decisions that have a very bad impact on recruiting and retention. Not only recruiting, by the way, it's retaining our men and women in uniform also. You recruit the member, but you retain the family. We always used to say, and that's still current. But again, I just don't see that the bringing in all those several hundred leaders at Quantico as a recruiting tool to try to help, recruit and retain that thing. I just thought it was unnecessary, and uh, it certainly was a demonstration of U.S. military leadership in one room and so forth. But I just didn't find it um,
Let's talk
particularly helpful in that case.
Gaza's the Gaza peace summit and the 20-point plan. Where does that stand now?
I'm sorry. Say that again. Gaza.
The Gaza peace summit stand now? It seems like,
Yeah, well, you're talking about, yeah, you're referring to when President Trump attended the after the June 22nd strike earlier this in the summer
well, it's
in
when
Egypt.
the Hamas decided to send back some of the hostages, and it felt like
Yeah, yeah.
going to have some resolution there.
The reason I kind of to get specific on the question is because there's lots of negotiations going back and forth and lots of summits. Some people call it a summit with a small s with a capital S, but I think let's put into context here. I think uh, what President Trump has done in his administration, one of the greatest successes, probably one of the greatest successes diplomatically in 2020 or in the 21st century so far, as really standing by Israel through thick and thin. However, being a good ally is also not necessarily just saying yes all the time, but it's also, you know, uh, making sure that first and foremost, what's most important here are U.S. national security objectives. Are they met? Yes or no? And then supporting our ally, and I'm fiercely defensive of Israel. I think is the right move and the smart move for us. But if you go back to what actually if you think of what Israel has done since October 7th, they have by and large decimated Hezbollah and Hezbollah leadership. They've certainly defeated and about ready to, I think, close in on finishing off Hamas in Gaza. The jury's still out on that at this point, but Houthis also to the south, who've really interrupted the 12% of global commerce shipping goes through the Red Sea and what they've done. But where has been most effective in terms of their support has been really coming from the United States. It started a little bit with the Biden administration. Need to give them some credit here, but largely it's been President Trump and this administration to provide not only the military support but also the diplomatic support and to some degree some of the economic and finance support. Um, that's been fundamental in terms of, I think, changing the course of the East, in my view. If you fast forward to June 22nd, when those seven B-2 bombers went after the Iranian nuclear weapon sites, by the way, that was a joint operation. It included Tomahawk cruise missiles from a Navy, from a U.S. submarine in the vicinity as well, which is remarkable if you think of the timing of that. Uh, but what led up to that was an extraordinary successful air campaign led by the Israeli Defense Forces, specifically the Israeli Air Force and their Special Operations Forces. So, there's a lot of credit to be due here, but I think it really comes down to political leadership. And in this case, President Trump finally said, "I'm not putting up with Iran anymore." They took our hostages back in 1979. They've been the largest exporter of terrorism in the world. They hate America. Death to Israel. Death to America. They've killed our men and women in uniform. They've killed our civilians, our citizens. And as I mentioned, the largest exporter of terrorism is Iran. Well, fast forward to June 26th, and then now these what have become really paramount U.S. leadership and an emboldened Israel led by Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very effective, I think, in changing the course of the Mideast. The challenge is we've got to stay on with that. National security, deterring conflict, fighting and winning our nation's wars is something you've got to do every day, 24/7, 365. Um, when the Berlin Wall came down under President Reagan, then you had Desert Shield and Desert Storm in 1990, 1991. We thought we were going through an era of peace and prosperity in Europe at the time. You have President Yeltsin signing off, the leader of Russia signing off on the Budapest Accords. That really gives a modicum of now independence of Ukraine and moving forward. Uh, I just glossed over the Budapest Accords in '94, but my point is that it's Putin who has said that the court says it'll remain a free and independent country, but what happens in 2014? He invades Crimea. What happens in 2022? He invades again Ukraine and the eastern Donbass region. Tyranny, those who want to do Americans particularly harm or our allies do harm. Those who don't care about uh, freedom and democracy. You have the rise of Putin's and others. We just have to, my point is that regardless, even though we've defeated Iran to a certain degree with their nuclear weapons capability, can't take eye off the ball. You've got to still maintain that. So back to the original point of your question, however, with regard to these summits and so forth, if we have one summit, we're going to probably need 15, 20 more in the ensuing months and years to make sure the peace is stabilized around the world.
Yeah. I also don't think that we're going to have any resolution with Russia and Ukraine, as Trump said that he wanted that war to be over in what, 24 hours. And
Yeah.
so we're, how will that resolve? Or, yeah, how does that get resolved?
Yeah, I think I was on air this morning talking about that. And I'm on air multiple times of the week talking specifically about what happens next in Ukraine and Russia and that conflict. I agree totally with the president. We need to end the killing. If you think of nearly 500,000 Ukrainian young men have lost their lives or been killed in action or wounded, countless civilians who've been terrorized by Putin and war criminal acts of cruise missile attacks, ballistic missile attacks, drones, bomber attacks against their residences, against their communities and their schools and their hospitals. So it's not just a frontline war. Russia also has lost hundreds of thousands of young men in this case who have been killed or wounded or actually have fled Russia because they don't want any part of this at all. And so it's astounding to me that we're in a quote a civilized world. It's astounding to the president that we allow this to happen. The challenge is Putin only understands power. He is a diabolical despot leader who has committed war crimes for decades now. You can't trust him. He does not. He'll talk peace like he did up in August at up in Alaska with President Trump. And what has he done? He has conducted a higher number of cruise missile, ballistic missile, drone attacks against innocent Ukrainian civilians. That tempo has been increased significantly. Even this past Friday, just a couple of days or so ago, 704 ballistic missile attacks, to include mainly drone attacks, but ballistic missile attacks and cruise missile attacks against two major features of the Ukrainian state. One is going after innocent Ukrainian civilians in their residences. He even went after the hometown of President Zelensky, but also he's going after their energy production capability. Why? Because he wants to break the will of Ukrainian people facing another harsh winter of these attacks from Russia. He thinks he's going to break the will of the people. I think he's stiffened their resolve. And so he's actually, think of it, Babby, he's using winter as a weapon. And so that's okay. I don't have any good news right now, is my point. Two things that are the major sticking points in any peace negotiated settlement that could be on the horizon, that is certainly under discussion right now, led by President Trump and the administration with Ukraine, Europe, and trying to get Putin to a peace settlement, or at least to the peace table. Two sticking points. One is terrain. Putin has taken about 80% of the Donbass region to the eastern part of Ukraine when he attacked back in February of 2022. He's not going to give that up. In fact, his demands, his stated demands, that he wants all of Donbass. Ukraine still controls about 15 to 20% of the Donbass region, specifically in Donetsk area. Why is that important? because there are four key cities, what they call the fortress belt, that line north and south of that eastern part of Ukraine. That is a defensive line that is so fortified that Putin can't break it. If he's given all of Donbass, that fortress belt goes away. And then he has a fast track into the second largest city. And he'll do this with his tanks and his air power. He'll go after Kharkiv, which is the second largest city in Ukraine. And then right after that, it's a cakewalk into Kiev. And if he goes into Kiev, he topples the Zelensky government. He puts it in his own despot, much like you see in Belarus. And then what you have is you've got his eye. He owns Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of the world and all their mineral resources. Okay, Ukraine is only number one on the hit list. He's going to go after other parts of Europe. He'll go after Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. I was just in Europe. Their major concern is if we allow Putin to take Ukraine, or if we allow some kind of soft peace settlement without taking the territory, without the second sticking point, those are security guarantees from the air, from the ground, from the maritime, cyber defensive capabilities. If we don't provide or help Ukraine to continue to be able to defend themselves without security guarantees, then what does that say with the rest of NATO that's been in play for 60, 70 years? Poland could come next. Other nations could come next as well. So it's a valid concern, and it really could change the course of history in the 21st century if we allow Putin to again, if we soften up on our position in terms of the territory aspect, his territorial sites that he has on eastern Donbass area, as well as not allowing for, at least from a negotiated settlement, security guarantees.
I thought that one of the agreements that he had with Putin, or maybe even he got Zelensky to agree, was to give some of that territory to Putin, and that would appease Putin. So, but
Yeah,
then that went
yeah.
that went off the table.
Well, that was part of the original 28-point plan. It's now down to, I understand, 19 points. Putin is not going to be appeased until Zelensky is toppled and he's being able to put in his own puppet government in Ukraine, period, dot. And he's going to be rattling his saber because he does have the largest nuclear, armaments force structure in the world, and that's is what really hindered Biden from taking effective action and supporting Ukraine, I think. We got to be careful here that we don't do the same thing to President Trump. Uh, a to get a peace deal done quickly, but if it's not done right, does more harm for U.S. national security in not only Europe, but I think around the free world. If the United States leading NATO does not stand up to Putin, what does that tell you about what President Xi's sights are with regard to Taiwan in 2027 or 2028? What does that do to the next mullah or the next ayatollah in Iran who wants to rejuvenate their weapons program or rejuvenate certainly their export of terrorism? Um, and
So,
so it's very concerning.
given your vast knowledge and history of the military, how do situations like these end? I mean, I know Putin, there's not been a
Hmm.
near lifetime until now. I mean, you've known, I'm saying like there's not been a Putin when you were, you serving under your first president. But I mean, if you look back, how does something like this how have they ended?
Well, they've ended with maintaining peace through deterrence. Deterrence is I have capabilities, specifically military capabilities, but other aspects of deterrence for national security includes strong diplomatic efforts, economics now or play a very important part, and certainly in the information domain. But militarily, we've stood up to uh, uh, communist leaders uh, through the years, through the decades. My dad served in the Cold War. I served somewhat in the Cold War. And really, the only thing, the Putins of the past understand are power. And the only thing they understand is to be deterred from taking action, from attacking the United States or attacking our allies, is knowing that we've got a big stick also. Two things that you need for effective deterrence in order to maintain the peace. One is you need capability. In our case, our capability is through a triad of strategic nuclear weapons, land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, sea-based subalong ballistic missiles, and bombers. When I was commander at Minot Air Force Base, I had two legs of the triad at my base. We were kind of jokingly known as the fifth most powerful nation in the world at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. Why? Because I had over 100 intercontinental ballistic missiles in and around the base. I also, commanded, dozens of B-52 bombers that were both nuclear as well as conventionally capable. Had capabilities. So, but leaders who want to do the United States harm, such as Putin, only understand power. And so they're not principled. They can't be trusted. And they only understand that with that power that the United States has, you need two critical elements. Capability that I just mentioned. That's why we need to be ever modernizing our U.S. military, not only to deter Putin, but deter others like Xi and maybe the next Ayatollah in Iran and so forth. But you also need the will. The will is the political will, the demonstrated will. And you communicate that will in terms of show of force, but demonstrating the political will that you're going to stand behind the principles that make this country free. By the way, those principles that make this country free also provide the top cover for other nations to be free as well. So that's a
You have to
those
be
are two key ingredients.
you have to be capable, you have to have military capable, you have to be economically capable, and then you have to show political will.
And I
Uh,
think if I can add one more thing, we've talked a little bit about the moral fiber. We go back to this idea of those six members of Congress trying to, tell American military or volunteers not to go, obey a lot, unlawful orders and so forth. We're trained on that, by the way, every day. We know that. But my point is I believe, and when I served, and now that I know who serves, I mentioned our son-in-law Robbie. We still maintain the strongest moral fiber in this nation of our men and women who volunteer to serve this great nation. That's another key ingredient. They know that, by the way. Our adversaries know that. Not only do we have the capability, we've got the will, but we've also got the American people behind our military now, finally. We didn't in Vietnam, frankly, and that hurt us. But fast forward to today, especially in this global war on terror, and especially in this 9/11, this generation who've served all throughout 9/11 and now serve uh, again so effectively in 2025. That's another aspect of this. I think that's key and important.
okay, I want to switch gears and wrap up with AI because we didn't really talk about AI.
Hmm.
So AI, I mean, I just saw some numbers in terms of in venture capital. I'm here in Silicon Valley. I believe AI investments, AI money flowing into venture-backed startups
Hmm.
focused on AI, or at least layering AI, now account for more than half of all the venture capital money going in 2025. I mean, it's funny if you drive around San Francisco, everything's AI. It almost reminds me of the dot-com boom when everything was dot com.
Yeah. Yep. I
You
hear you.
take those signs. I should take photos of those signs, but it it is the one thing about AI when it comes to defense, I guess, from what I understand, is that people are afraid of AI, sort of allowing AI or enabling AI to make decisions, particularly in
Mhm.
defense. So you must have a human in the loop, but there's a concern that China will not have a human in the loop. China will continue to aggressively invest and be progressive in and innovate in AI in defense. For me, the way I look at it is, and that should prompt us to be more aggressive as well and think about ways where AI does not have to be, a human does not have to be in the loop. For me, when I think about AI and humans being in the loop, I think about human AI being extremely risk averse, and in
Hmm.
situations where they're almost too calculating for their own good. Whereas humans, well, we have emotion, and there's moments in time where you will take those risks because of emotion. And that's where heroes are made. That's where
Hmm.
miracles are made. And that's why, even though we're afraid that China may exceed because excel and passes up, I think we always need to consider the human in the loop because humans can create miracles. What are your thoughts?
I'm tracking with you. I think not only is it the human in the loop regarding capabilities, but judgment as well. I like the word judgment in there. It takes it out. You know, um, we've been having AI tools for a long time. It's nothing new. Fast forward here in 2025. When I was the major general at the time, a two-star, I was the deputy U.S. Strategic Command. It was a global command. We did space, we did missile defense, we did nuclear strategy, cyber. I mean, it was a wonderful assignment, but it was 25 hours a day just trying to stay ahead if you possibly can. But it's a very data centric command, and we're finding our United States military is very data centric at this point. We used to say, rather than us working for the data, have the data work for us. Really, AI is really harnessing that data and using it to make us a more effective military, to be able to present the facts to a commander. So the commander, as you said, the human, either he or she can make that judgment call versus having it be on autopilot and so forth. And by the way, that could be in many sectors. It just doesn't have to be in national security. It could be in health, could be in fin or finance. It could be across those sectors. 2 points I'd like to make. Number one, go back to the original, maybe one of the original topics we had at the top of the call when then Vice Admiral Mitch Bradley was trying to make that call on that drug boat strike on September 2nd. He had a whole, again, he had lawyers, he had operators, he had intel specialists. He had real time data in his command post to make that call to attack and attack effectively, not only to take out the target so effectively, but to protect the lives of the American men and women in his command in and around that target. So to me, I see it as an opportunity to do just that. It adds to the judgment of a commander on scene in this case. It adds to the judgment of the combatant commander over the whole area of responsibility, not only on that particular operation, but perhaps in all the Western Hemisphere. It adds to the ability of the president to make the right call in authorizing the use of these warfare tools to, again, to support national security objectives, but also to protect our American women who are in harm's way in this case. So that to me, it's what I would refer to, Bambi, as more like a force multiplier. It adds to the capability of our ability of the nation to win our fight and win our nation's wars. Okay. The other aspect to it, from an investment standpoint, I'm on the board of directors of a SPAC. It's called a Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation, and we just went public a couple of days or so ago. That's awesome. Boy, we got a long way to go though, and we will very effectively, because we're going to identify a corporation that wants to go public. But really, where we're focusing on, interesting, I won't get into a whole lot of details, but it's those companies that are really able to tap into, utilize, and to maximize the data through AI and other tools in order to provide the warfighter, in this case, the capability to be more effective in a particular scenario. Final point is here. I believe AI is it's been around a long time, but I think we're more effectively being able to use AI so that our military, when called upon to fight and win our nation's wars in a conflict, that they don't go in there with one hand tied behind their back with old equipment, and that they go in there and they win 31-28 in the end of the second overtime. I want them to go in there, and AI is going to be key to this, and it's key now, but it's going to be key in the future. I want them going in there to win 99-0 in the first quarter, and that adversary, be it China, Russia, or some non-state actor, some terrorist that wants to do us harms, where they give up before we even fire a shot. Or maybe after we fired a shot, that again, it protects American lives. It upholds what the fabric of this American, this United States is about, is providing freedoms not only for ourselves, but for the free world. But it also creates an environment. So my son-in-law, when he's on his 8th combat deployment, that he comes home safe and sound. And again, we won 99-0. And I think really peace and prosperity are really underscored in this case, and it's been led by the United States.
Okay, next question about AI. There are striking parallels between AI and nuclear technology in terms of ethical dilemmas and national security. They both could wipe out millions and cause the end of the world. Their dual use purpose, though, right? There's obviously
Right.
it's helpful in many ways, but AI can be dangerous. Many people want to regulate AI, but then there's a lot of critics about over regulating AI. I talked to you when I wrote this piece about
Hmm.
shouldn't overregulate AI. And it was really just by looking at the personalities of AI, thinking like, look, AI is not one centralized computer. It's multiple computers.
Hmm.
They have different personalities. One being anthropic, which it tends to be,
Hmm.
ethics philosophy tends to be cautious over bold. And Grok's philosophy, Grok, the AI X, tends to be irreverent and a little bit thinking out of the box. And
Hmm.
so they'll clash. They have different personalities, and I think that's really good as far as
Hmm.
distributing the power across these different AI and philosophies and entities. And so I lean towards deregulation or less
Hmm.
regulation of AI. And it sounds like you agree with me there.
I do. I think first off, the train has left the station with regard to AI. If you think you're going to corral AI at this point, there's a practical aspect to that. However, go back to a previous conversation you and I had. Are we going to work for the data or allow the data to work for us? Where the data works for us, for mankind, for however broadly you want to, underscore this, there should be some aspects of what I would call good regulation. Good regulation, number one, keeps the playing field level for business and commerce, and so that businesses succeed based on merit versus an inside deal or that kind of stuff. Secondly, I think that we ought to not harness AI on overburdening with regulations because therefore it won't be able to maximize the effect, the positive effect first have on the American people, but also our allies and friends as well. Third, we ought to be wary, however, and we be wary over the fact that there are adversaries out there that do want to do harm with AI. And so there's that piece where we need to make sure that it's like President Reagan, trust but verify. Same thing with AI. We ought to make sure that it's a trustful aspect of our daily lives because, Bambi, you and I did talk about that earlier. Hey, it's here. It's not going anywhere. Train has left the station. But make it a positive thing in people's lives, not make it something that they feel as if because it's almost as if they're afraid of the unknown because they can't see the unknown. They think it's the 12-foot boogeyman out there, where really it's something that it's a commodity that we can make useful. Final point is that we unharness AI, but it's still being led and used by people who have the judgment in terms of how best to implement AI, but how best to use it. I would be very saddened if we were not allowed AI to be able to, as effective in a situation, to go find the cause of cancers or go prevent a conflict or prevent if we are unable to prevent the employment of, say, a weapon of mass destruction, whereby we could have used the tools of AI, but we didn't because we were scared of it. That's not the wrong idea. I'm with you. I think, and there's a happy medium there between regulation and deregulation. I agree.
Okay, we're going to end this kind of on a happy note. So,
Okay.
more questions and maybe a personal note. It's Christmas, holidays. Everybody
Yeah.
has their favorite favorite family tradition that's really quirky. We have one. It would take me a little while to explain it, but it's hilarious. At least to us. Maybe somebody looking in maybe weird. But what's a family tradition for Christmas that you guys do?
Yeah. Well, I remember mom and dad. We moved. My sister Kathy, by the way, she married into the military. Also, her husband's a retired Navy surface warfare officer, and they happily live in Indianapolis right now. But her and I, growing up with mom and dad, I think a couple memories that really stay with me and try to execute in my own personal life now as an adult. Um, Mom would always, and dad would as well, we'd have presents under the tree. And we weren't an affluent family. We were just, dad was a captain or major in the Air Force serving and so forth. But I just remember that we would wake up on Christmas morning and Santa would have actually come to our house because we kept out the cookies and the eggnog and that type of thing. But he would also leave behind not presents from mom and dad or grandparents, but presents that he laid, and they were all in red and white tissue paper. Those were Santa's presents. And they
Mm.
were always a big surprise. And so fast forward, even in our family today, I like to keep that aspect of red and white tissue papers because it's something extra special under the tree. Whether or not you believe in Santa Claus or not, I happen to believe in Santa Claus, by the way. But whether you not believe in Santa Claus, it's the spirit of the giving aspect of this. It's so important. The other point is I remember when my dad was in Vietnam, and we were apart for going on 2 years. But mom, through her selfless love and dedication, you can tell I had wonderful parents, mom and dad, and Gigi did as well. Her folks are, I never got to meet her dad, but just wonderful people. But just trying to keep the spirit of giving alive, keep the spirit of God in our lives alive. And if that's through gifts and so forth, you don't want to lose the reason for the season, obviously, with the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But it's that just keep a little bit of light in this world. There's so much darkness in it, you
Yeah.
know? Let's keep the light of the world going on. Mom did that, even though when dad was in Vietnam and we are worried about him, whether or not he's going to come home. Unfortunately, there's 58,000, 9,000, 59,000 names on the wall in Vietnam at the Vietnam War of families who their sons and daughters and dads and didn't come home. But in this case, my dad came home. But mom kept that spirit of Christmas alive in 1967. I'll never forget that. And so I try to take that. Good night. That was what, almost 60 years ago. I still try to do that even during the Christmas season. So anyway, that's a long answer to a short question, but you got me on the Christmas spirit part of it. I think the Christmas spirit starts with obviously our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ being born, but it's also about giving and doing something for others and enjoying life and having that light in our lives. Keep that burning.
Yeah. Well, we have many traditions, but the one
Yeah,
tradition we have that's sort of come up in the last 5 years is that we always open stockings. We always do
yeah, we do too. Yeah.
Christmas stockings, but everyone always gets a tea bag. I know that sounds strange, and I
Gets
told
did you say tea bag?
tea bag. It's become a tea bag because we everybody opens their presents out of their stocking each time. I mean, it takes a long time because sometimes we'll have
Yeah,
people and they're going through their stocking and
yeah.
invariably they take out the tea bag and it's we all cheer. So it's a little crazy. And we all know we're going to get it, and but we're excited to get it. Don't ask me how that.
I love it.
Anyway, okay. Last question. What's your favorite
Sure.
movie?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Favorite war movie? Do you
Mm, I do. I've got two of them. One's
Okay.
an old one, one's a new one.
Wait,
The
I'm writing.
old one is 12 o'clock high.
Ooh.
It talks about Eighth Air Force in Europe during World War II. It underscores the heroics of that World War II generation through the skies of Europe. You had at some point along the 1943 into 44, you had a 50% chance of surviving a B-17 combat mission over the skies of Europe. Why is that important? Because highest wounded or killed in action ratio of any unit in World War II was 8th Air Force. Um, and so coming out of that, you have the United States Air Force born literally or established in 1947. And why is it that we were so focused on, everybody gives me a hard time. I'm an Air Force general. I got a golf course and got a child development centers and we got automobile place. We fix our cars. We got wonderful fitness centers and so forth. That was because the principle of the leadership, the young leaders that came out of then leading the United States Air Force post 1947, was their experience in World War II, specifically over the skies of Europe and to some degree in Japan. They saw that 50% killed in action wounded ratio every time you had to, take it off. And so they said, when we established this United States Air Force, we're going to do it right. And therefore, the principle was focused on people and the family members. Second movie is, sorry for that diatribe, I get you, but you get me going. Second one is Saving Private Ryan.
Okay.
I think Tom Hanks acting in that. I think the whole ensemble, but really I still watch Saving Private Ryan and it still grips me from those soldiers on the ground, what they were doing. Don't leave an American behind. Um, their job is to fight and win our nation's wars, but we're focused on our buddies. Second one, or the second point of it, or my last point of this, at the end of the movie, he tells Private Ryan, when death is all around him, when the Germans were finally beaten back on that bridge, and the character that Tom Hanks is playing, the army captain, he goes up to Private Ryan and he tells him to earn this. That
Mm.
stays with me. I think we need to earn this still, whether it's Robbie in uniform or it's me as an old veteran or it's others who've served. But you know, the fact that we, very few of us, less than way tremendously one, less than 1% of Americans now have the opportunity to serve in our military, or much less even be considered veterans right now. But the fact is that doesn't necessarily make us stand out any more so than someone else. But the fact is that we're given the opportunity, Bambi, to earn this. It's not about our service; it's about serving American people. In my personal views, it's serving God, family, and nation, and to earn this. Thankfully, though, earning it for the ultimate life that we have, Christ already earned that for us on the cross. But in terms of fighting and winning our nation's wars, I think when the captain says to Private Ryan, "Earn this," and then he goes throughout his whole lifetime and he brings his family back to the Veterans Grave area, the National Grave Center there in France, and he goes up to the captain's um, gravesite. He says, asks his wife, "Am I a good man? Did he earn this?"
Yeah, that is lovely. I'm watching Band of Brothers now.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I'm with you. Yep.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for the scenes, but I don't think it's going to happen. But I was hoping they would recreate the scene of Private Ryan inside those episodes.
Yeah.
It didn't, but it's still well done. So, um,
It's exceptional.
well, this was great. You are a wealth of information. It just kind of winds you up and you go. So it's really nice.
Sorry about that. I probably, in the news media world, as you well know, you're looking for 30 or 45-second sound bites. I threw that rule book after the first question. My apologies, but
Yeah, that's good
yeah,
though. That's
yeah,
good. Like sometimes you're one of those guests where they have to keep you on, like you just do your monologue and then they say thank you. They only take you for 3 or 4 minutes.
yeah,
It's nice. I've had you for an hour and a half, so I really appreciate
yeah.
it. So this
Thank
is
you, man.
great. Dick, thank you so much for we will, hopefully we'll talk again in the
I'd
future.
love to. I'd be honored. There's so many things. I mean, we just scratched the surface. I want to get more of your perspective. And let me close on this point. It's like my dad said, if you're not learning, you're dying.
Mm.
And so, and both mom and dad are buried up at West Point and so forth. And what a great. I wish you could have met both of them. They're just wonderful people. But a lot of their lives have still impacted my life and so forth. Just like Gigi's folks have impacted her life. But the point is that when you made that comment about the assembling of all the general officers and flag officers and their senior list leaders at Quantico, remember that conversation about an hour or so ago? That's a good perspective. I haven't thought about that in terms of that show of leadership, show of unity, show of combat power inside of one room, to not necessarily to Secretary Hegseth or maybe to the administration or even to the American people, but perhaps to our adversaries and our allies as well. I'll let me noodle on that one a little bit. I'm going to give you that one. I'll give you
Okay.
props on that one. How's
I
that?
did. I thought I was the only one. Anyway, thank you.
That's
At
good.
least, hey, look, I don't know the intent, but at least the reception of it, at least my reception of it was
Mhm.
that it was a good showing to our allies and adversaries. So,
Good point. Good point.
all right, Dick, well, we'll wrap it up there. Wish you the very Merry Christmas. Have fun with your 15 grandchildren and your six, and I'll have with fun with my big. I have 4 boys, so we have a pretty big family. No
All right. Well,
grandchildren yet, but
oh,
um,
what it's a grandchildren be a blessing. Make sure you're gonna need more tea bags, Bambi. So go get those tea bags.
I'm pushing my boys. By the way, I am. I have one who says that it'll happen soon. So uh,
Good.
yeah. So anyway, thanks again, Dick. I've been speaking with Lieutenant General Dick Newton. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen. You've been listening and watching CRT.